So to start off, I want to make it clear that when I talk about suburbs in this video, what I'm really talking about is this. The stereotypical American city. Spread out, you need a car to get anywhere you want, all the houses look like this, and Olive Garden is considered fine dining. I bring this up because this use of the word suburb is technically wrong. A suburb is really just a city that is close to a bigger city. Euclidean zoning, which is the name for this type of city development, is usually associated with suburbs in America, but it doesn't have to be. In Indiana, there is a city where this is a suburb of this. Yes, seriously. So just know that throughout this video, when I use the word suburbs, what I really mean is cities with Euclidean zoning, which happens to be most American cities. I also want to make something else clear, and that's that I don't think there is some objectively correct way to live. What I mean is, whether you like cities, suburbs, or the countryside, it's all a matter of preference. So, if you are someone who genuinely prefers living in suburbia over an urban, walkable city or the countryside, then that's fine, that's just your preference. But still, as someone who grew up in suburbia and finds it to be inferior to the alternatives, I will be very critical of suburbia. So if you're someone who can't handle listening to someone complain about something that you like, well, I suggest you turn off this video right now. So first, I want to actually explain a bit about myself and how I came to love cities. So for those of you that don't know, I am Puerto Rican. I grew up in the suburbs of San Juan. Now, Puerto Rico is, much like the mainland US, very car-centric. But of course, when I was a kid, I didn't really think about these things. This was all just normal to me. I didn't really give it any second thought. And I assume this is probably the case for most Americans. So for the first few years of my life, I didn't really mind living in suburbia. That was until I turned 14. Why? What happened when I turned 14? Well, my dad, whom throughout my life has moved around a lot, had recently moved to possibly one of the very few places in Puerto Rico that comes close to being a modern urban city. And that place is Condado, a small but dense urban neighborhood in Santurce, which is a suburb of San Juan. My dad lived in an apartment which was very centrally located. When you walked out of his apartment, you were quite literally right at the center of everything. During the time that he lived there, whenever I visited him, I did a lot of walking, which was very different from anything I was used to. But I liked it. I enjoyed just walking around and exploring the neighborhood on foot. And then, in one fateful morning, I woke up to realize that there was no milk for my cereal. I complained to my half-asleep dad about it, and he basically told me, you know where the convenience store is, just walk there. So I did. It was like a 5-minute walk from the apartment to the store. So I'm in the store, I'm waiting in line to buy milk, and then that is when it hit me. Something in my brain just kind of clicked and I realized, holy shit, I just went from my house to this store without needing to be driven by my parents. And that was the point of no return. Before, I hadn't really put two and two together as to what was it about Condado that made it feel so different from the suburban neighborhood that I lived in with my mom. But at that precise moment, I finally realized what was so different. After that, the allure of urban living really grew on me. And I also came to the very real conclusion that back then, when I was 14 years old, if I lived in a place like Condado, I would have had a lot more freedom to move around without needing my parents to act as my personal chauffeurs. So that's the backstory for how I came into contact with urban living, and most certainly the origin story for how I came to love urban and walkable cities. My dad eventually moved out of Condado, which meant that my days of urban living, however limited they were, had come to an end. Over the years, besides occasionally just daydreaming about one day moving to a big city, I went back to not thinking too much about my living environment. That was until a few years ago when I stumbled upon the online urbanism community. I'm sure you've seen videos like these on your recommended.
Here at Not Just Kikes, we hate views. But did you know that views did 9/11?
These videos sent me down a massive rabbit hole, and I came out of the rabbit hole with a really big distaste for suburbia. Like, even more than I had before. Before it was more just, I like cities and I hope to move to one someday, but now I was genuinely a lot more angry at the suburban living environment. Okay, maybe angry isn't the right word, it's more like very mildly annoyed by it. And so with all that being said, why do I hate suburbia so much? Well, I wrote down a list of the reasons why I dislike suburbia, and I noticed after I wrote it that I could kind of group my criticisms into 3 categories. So that is what I did. These 3 categories are car dependence, violations to our liberty, and ugly architecture. And I will start with the first category, car dependence. In suburbia, you don't have many choices for mobility. The only way you can get around within a reasonable time frame is with a personal car. Now, I do not hate cars. I want to make that clear because I know that there's like this anti-car movement going around on the internet, and I want to make it clear that that's not where I stand. I do not hate cars. In fact, I actually went through a car phase when I was younger. I watched all of these guys on YouTube. I played Forza 5 on my Xbox. I got into arguments online about why JDMs are superior to American cars, and I watched Initial D. So I think you'd be hard-pressed to call me anti-car. My issue is not with cars, my issue is with car-dependent city planning. When you live in suburbia, you are essentially tied down to your car, and I think that this is a problem for multiple reasons. First of all, I don't like the idea that my ability to participate in society relies solely on me having a functioning car. Because what if I didn't have a functioning car? Would I have to just rely on the barely functioning bus system? Would I have to just man up and walk these dangerous and long distances to get to my destination? You know, for thousands of years, we have been designing cities in which it was completely possible to live without a car. It was possible back then, and it most certainly is possible now. If living in your city without a car is practically impossible, then, to me, that's just a badly designed city. Second of all, I don't like just how much of my money goes into maintaining a car. I have to spend money on gas, oil, maintenance, insurance, etc. And that's all assuming that the car has already been fully paid for. It does not make me happy at all to think about what I could have bought with all that money that I spent on my car. And third of all, driving for every single trip just plain sucks. Just because I might enjoy driving sometimes, it doesn't mean that I want to do it all the time. When driving becomes the only mode of transport, it goes from being enjoyable to at best being mundane and at worst being downright infuriating. Another issue with car dependency is that when driving is the only mode of transport, it makes the driving experience bad for everyone. Let me ask you this. How many times have you heard people saying that their state has the worst drivers in the country? I bet you hear that all the time. Oh, California has the worst drivers. No, Florida has the worst drivers. No, Texas. No, Massachusetts. And I really gotta ask, what state doesn't have the worst drivers in the country? No, really, I want to know. Like, does anyone out there ever say, wow, my state has the best drivers in the country? I have never heard anyone saying that, and there's a reason why that's the case. There's a reason why every state has the worst drivers in the country. Well, 2 reasons, actually. The first is that when you force everyone into a car, that means everyone is going to drive. Even people who don't like or want to drive. And obviously, if you don't like or want to drive, then you're less likely to be a good driver. The second reason is that, again, because everyone has to drive, that means there's going to be a lot of cars on the road. We have a lot of people in this country and they all have places to be. So when all of these people are trying to get to their destination at the same time, you're going to have a lot of cars on the road. It's just inevitable. Kids do not have freedom in suburbia. That is my next reason for disliking car dependency. This is one of those things that I don't think enough people are taking as seriously as they should. Usually when I tell someone that kids in America don't have freedom, the response is something like, well, of course, kids can't leave their house on their own because outside is too dangerous for them. And you know what? I used to think the same thing too. That was until I was made aware of this little country called Japan. You see, unlike in the land of the free, where people live like prisoners until they turn 16 years old, in Japan, people as young as 6 years old are allowed to walk around, go to school, and even use public transit all on their own.
ゆうかちゃんは大の人見知りだけど毎週お母さんと来るこの商店街には顔見知りがいっぱい。お父さんがうどんが欲しいの。うどんが欲しい。あれ、なんか急に元気が出てきた。実はここゆうかちゃんおなじみのお店。いつも店員さんが遊んでくれるんです。さぬきうどんする？うどんがあるなんて知りませんでした。はい、うどん一つでいいの？はい。お母さんはな、ゆうかちゃんの代わりにお母さんの代わりにゆうかちゃんが行ってって言われて。そう、偉かったな。
This is mainly because Japanese cities are just very well designed. They are cities where walking and cycling is safe, and they have some of the best public transit in the whole world, making them a safe environment where kids can get around without the fear of being ran over by a car. And yes, there is also another reason why Japanese cities are so safe. Japan is just a really safe country overall, because Japanese culture seems to care a lot more about safety than ours. And they don't just let criminals back on the streets minutes after arresting them. And they also don't import millions of third world... Okay, look, yes, all of that stuff about low crime stats and no third world importation is true, but the fact of the matter is that even if American cities got their shit together and actually started punishing crime, still no one would walk around in our cities because most of our cities look like this. If not even adults can walk around here safely, then you bet your ass that little kids can't do it either. And that's sad. That's sad, and it's also a serious issue that I don't think many people are taking seriously. We complain about kids staying inside all day doom scrolling and playing video games, but what do you expect them to do when they live in a place like this? I think a lot of Americans just kind of forget about how much growing up in suburbia sucks as soon as they get their independence, but I haven't forgotten. I hated this shit when I was a teenager, and when I think about all of the days in my teenagehood that I wasted away in my room alone because I couldn't leave my house, I just get sad. Parents can't always act as your personal chauffeurs. They have their own busy schedules too. If I wanted to visit a friend, I'd have to plan that out days in advance to see if both my parents and the other kids' parents could cram that into their schedules. And this made meeting up with my friends less of a casual thing that I did regularly and more of an event. Something that's reserved for special occasions. Now I'm sure there's gonna be some people saying, well, skill issue, you should have just tried harder to meet up with your friends. And indeed, online I have seen people retelling the lengths they took to meet up with their friends. Everything from walking over an hour under 15 degrees Fahrenheit while it's snowing, to walking through forest and undeveloped land, to trespassing over other people's property, to even using abandoned train tracks as a makeshift bridge across bodies of water. And while these might lead to some fond memories of when you were a teenager, I really gotta ask, is this good? Is this something that should be celebrated? Cause I don't know about you, but if I found out that kids in my city are trespassing over people's property and walking over train tracks just so that they can be with their friends, I'd say that's a huge societal failure. So again, with all of this in mind, is it really such a mystery why everyone in America is so addicted to looking at a screen, why it seems like everyone nowadays is socially anxious, and why we have a loneliness epidemic? And yes, I am blaming all of that on car dependency. Obviously, there's other factors at play here, but To say that the way we design our cities isn't at least a major factor into all of this would just be idiotic. The way that we design our cities directly affects how we behave. And when you design your cities to be as isolating as possible with no third places or any way to randomly bump into your neighbors, you're going to have a disjointed society of lonely people with no sense of community or culture who all secretly hate each other. The screens are not the source of the issue. The screens are a symptom of the issue. Try being a sedentary loner shut-in when you live in a place like this. And with that, we have concluded the first category, which was car dependence. Only 2 more to go. Man, this video is turning out way longer than I thought it would be. The second reason for why I don't like Suburbia is that Suburbia infringes on our liberties. Now, what do I mean by that exactly? Well, first I should clarify that I lean libertarian politically. And if there's one thing that you should know about us libertarians is that we place a huge importance on property rights. Many libertarians, myself included, believe that all human rights are downstream of property rights. So for libertarians, the respect of property rights is one of the most foundational things in any long-lasting, self-sustainable human civilization. And this is a concept that a lot of American conservatives pretend that they support as well. But I really gotta ask, and for clarification, I am now talking directly to the conservative NIMBYs who might be watching this video. Can we talk about how much it seems like you guys just don't give a shit about property rights? Because despite how much conservative NIMBYs like to cry about liberty and how much they hate big government, they seemingly don't have a problem with infringing on our liberties or big government when it comes to urban planning. I know it might not seem like it, but Suburbia actually requires more government to build and maintain than traditionally developed cities. We are 100% dependent on government. Whether this is right or wrong, it is a fact. That's a quote from William J. Levitt, the guy who created Levittown, aka the template for Suburbia. But why is this? Why does Suburbia require so much government? Surely, since less people live here, there shouldn't be a need for too much government, right? Well, let me ask you something. What do you notice about this picture? Do you notice how everything looks so monotone? How every house looks almost identical? That's just not something you can achieve without central top-down planning. Everything that you see in this picture looks the way it does. Not because property owners voluntarily chose to make their property look like this. It looks like this because making it look any other way is downright illegal. Earlier in the video I mentioned something called Euclidean zoning, and now is a better time than ever to bring that back up. As I briefly mentioned earlier, Euclidean zoning is the type of zoning that most American cities follow, and it's the thing that makes American cities look the way they do. This type of zoning separates houses and stores by residential zones and commercial zones. And it also makes it illegal to build certain types of houses in the residential areas. So like you might think, okay, well at least in the residential zone you could build duplexes or row houses or small apartments. But no, you can't. If the residential area is zoned for single-family houses, then anything other than single-family houses are illegal. Oh, but it doesn't just stop there. Euclidean zoning also comes with a huge list of building codes. We have minimum lot sizes, which requires the land the property takes up to be a certain size. Setback requirements, which mandate a minimum distance between the houses and the streets, as well as in between neighboring houses. Height restrictions, which make even 2-story high single-family houses illegal in some single-family housing areas. And the list goes on and on and on. Like there are hundreds of these laws all around American cities, all with the explicit intent of keeping the development of our cities spread out and low density. All of that effort and resources used to enforce these laws, and the output is less housing and less convenience. But the thing is, these laws are technically necessary to keep Suburbia from becoming too urban. You see, when you don't have the government telling property owners what they are and aren't allowed to build, what you get is the traditional city downtown. Almost all of these historic downtown districts in America were built long before these laws were put into place. And look, I know that not everyone likes this type of environment, but you gotta admit, it is kind of ironic that the same people who talk about living in accordance with nature seem oddly antagonistic to what is debatably a more natural and human-scaled approach to urban planning. Like, if it's a contest between which one of these is more pro-human or which one is more based in trad, the winner is traditional cities. One very common defense for zoning laws that I tend to see is that zoning laws are a necessary evil, that we have to infringe on property rights because otherwise our cities would all look like Kowloon. And who wants to live in Kowloon? Well, to refute this, I once again have to go to the land of the rising sun to make my counter-argument. Now, Japan does have zoning laws, but their zoning laws closely align with property rights infinitely more than ours do. Unlike in the land of the free, Japan doesn't have anything even closely resembling single-family zoning. You can pretty much build any kind of housing you want, wherever you want. In fact, you can also build businesses wherever you want. With a few restrictions, in Japan, if you own the land, you can do whatever you want with it. The only real restriction is that you can't build houses on some super industrial areas due to pollution, but aside from that, it's pretty much fair game. And you might think this means that everyone in Japan just lives stacked on top of each other, similar to Kowloon. But no. I mean, yeah, Japanese cities are very densely populated, much more than the standard American city. But Japan still has less dense housing. Further out into the suburbs, where the land is cheaper, you do see bigger single-family homes. So if you really want to buy a plot of land and build a single-family house for yourself and tell the rest of society to fuck off, you can do that. As a property owner, that is a right that you have. However, you also have the right to build things other than single-family homes, such as multi-family homes or even these mixed-use buildings that have both a business in the bottom floor and a house in the top floor. Now tell me, does that not sound much more aligned with libertarian and, yes, even conservative values of liberty, freedom, and property rights? And the last thing I want to touch upon in this category is that all of these zoning laws and building codes, not only do they infringe on the fundamental human right to own property, not only do they make our cities sterile, boring, soulless, and inconvenient, but they also make housing more expensive. What the fuck? Once again, I have to use Japan as an example. Man, how many times have I said that throughout this video? Japan is one of the few countries that does not currently have a major housing crisis. And this is because, unlike in America, housing isn't treated like some kind of pest that needs to be tightly controlled by the government. Japanese people can pretty much build any type of housing anywhere they want. And as a result, you can find a decent apartment in Tokyo for $800 a month. Alright, now just let that sink in for a moment, right? Just $800 rent to live in one of the biggest metropolitan areas in the whole world. You won't find anything even close to that price in any of the top 10 cities in America. Alright, so now we're finally on the last category, and hopefully this one won't be as long as the previous two. This one is ugly architecture. Should be pretty self-explanatory. Suburbia looks like ass. I know that in this postmodern world, beauty is subjective or whatever. A fat landwell can be just as beautiful as a curvy, tall woman with big boobs. At least, that is what fat landwells on Blue Sky want me to think. But I really gotta ask, does anyone out there actually think that this looks beautiful? Like, genuinely, unironically, think that this right here is like the peak of architecture. Like, good enough to compete with the Roman Colosseum or Vatican City or that cathedral from Russia that's in the title screen of Tetris. At best, I think most people are just indifferent to this type of architecture, but I'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who actually thinks that this looks good. I mean, I guess like there's some Redditors who kind of half-ironically like it in a so bad it's good kind of way, but that's about as much praise as this architecture is ever going to get. There's no real point in trying to pretend otherwise. Suburbia is just ugly, plain and simple. Oh, and by the way, like I know that some people try to use commie blocks as the counter-argument to this, and to that I gotta say that yes, commie blocks are also terrible man-made horrors beyond our comprehension, but just because commie blocks look like ass doesn't mean that Suburbia doesn't look like ass too. It just means that both America and Europe did their fair share of crimes against architecture in the mid-20th century. I and many urbanists do not consider replacing Mac mansions with commie blocks to be the ideal solution. The cities that urbanists tend to glaze the most are cities that manage to preserve their old historic architecture. Architecture that was built in a time when most urban dwellers seemed to appreciate beauty more than they do now. And the thing that we hate to see the most is the destruction of beautiful historic architecture to be replaced with ugly modernist architecture.
Oh my god! Oh god damn it, bitch, why? Oh shit! Oh fuck! I was planning on having breakfast today! God damn it, food is ruined for the next week for me now!
And look, I also get that it can't all just be form over function. After all, the purpose of a city is for people to live in them, and if your choices are either suburbia, commie blocks, or nothing at all, then yeah, suburbia or commie blocks would be preferable. But just because we're trying to build enough houses for everyone, doesn't mean we can't at least try to make the houses pretty. Trying to make pretty houses in a reasonable amount of time and as cheaply and efficiently as possible is a job for the free market. However, for nearly a century now, the free market has had its hands tied behind its back, insofar as making American cities beautiful again. But it doesn't have to be this way. Just because we took a wrong turn in the mid-20th century doesn't mean that we can't change course and move in the right direction. Urbanism is still a very niche topic, especially here in America, but it is growing and many American cities are taking steps to move in the right direction. For example, Charleston, South Carolina's city planners have been working hard at maintaining the historic beauty of the city and building upon it. And they're not alone. Many other American cities have started doing away with these zoning laws, such as most famously Minneapolis. So it might not happen tomorrow, it might not even happen within our lifetimes, but I have faith that American cities will improve as time goes on. But for those of you who are impatient, despite how black-pilled I seem throughout this whole video, the truth is, America does still have a number of beautiful historic cities that managed to survive the urban renewal era. So if you're an American urbanist starving for a beautiful city to call home, at the very least you have choices that don't require changing your nationality. There were a few more things I wanted to say in this video, like how suburbs don't have to suck, and it's actually completely possible to make suburbs that offer the space and quietness that suburbanites like, while also offering a walkable experience with good public transit. But honestly, this video's gone on for way too long, so instead I'm gonna link a video in the description by Not Just Bikes that talks about this very thing. I also wanted to mention how a lot of people think designing a city that prioritizes walking and cycling would be terrible for drivers, but that is not true at all. The Netherlands, which has some of the best designed cities in the world, is often ranked as one of the best countries to be a driver in. Once again, I'll link a video by Not Just Bikes that talks about this in the description. Alright, that's it. That's all I had to say. Goodbye.